Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to Reading Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. Today we are turning to Book 6 of the Ethics, which deals with the virtues of the mind, or intellectual virtues. In other words, the questions of virtues that deal with the we deal with the highest function of the soul, right? The intellect, the intellect, the mind, in that sense. So these are the virtues of intellection, thought, how we think. In many ways, Book 6 of the Ethics is a critical book in studying of Aristotle because this is where he presents the what we call looking at the human mind in terms of reasoning, how reasoning operates, and he gives kind of the first kind of complete, only place in the ethics where he kind of gives a general overview of reasoning and the variations of reasoning in terms of what it does. This is a very important book because scholars it will be a book that someone like Heidegger will, in the 1920s, will really focus on and plays a very significant role in his how he looks at the question of rationality in response to the Enlightenment, reductionistic conceptions of it, and then turns to Book 6, particularly at two or three junctions, particularly in his first third of his lecture course on Plato's Sophist, will focus on fleshing out what Aristotle says here in Book 6. So therefore, this is of the Ethics. So therefore, this is a very important book. It it is a transition in the ethics away from the so-called ethical virtues or the moral virtues, the virtues of character. Now, these are the virtues of mind. He'll spell it out. Now, chapter one, this volume, book 6, has around 13 chapters. Okay, and the first chapter, chapter 1, kind of introduces us to the question. Okay, so let's turn to the first chapter. And it won't be that long. It'll be shorter than other, it'll be short as you see here in that sense. So now, since we happen to have said previously that one ought to choose the middle term, right? So therefore, we have to choose the middle term. Virtue is the middle term always. In this, we talk about the virtue is always concerned with the middle term. So we have to choose the middle term, not the excess and not the deficiency. And that the middle term is what correct reason, orthologos, states it to be. Let us define this. So for in all the characteristics mentioned, the previous characteristics, right? All the previous characteristics we talked about that we went through chapter 4, chapter and 3 and 4, chapter, the virtues, these ethical virtues. Um, um, we had something freaky happen for a second. A diagnostic thing came up and I had to kill it. I don't know why it came up. It's like I have to see what happened later after this video. But we have to look at the question of right reason in terms of this. So all the things we've talked about, right? All the things. So for in all the characters mentioned, just as in the others as well, there is a certain target that he who possesses reason, literally the reason or for the correct reason, right? Who possesses or who has reason or possesses reason, right? The who possesses reason looks to and so tightens or loosens, and there is a certain defining boundary of the middle term, which middle we assert is between excess and deficiency, since it is accord with correct reason. Now, here the metaphor changes from hitting the mark to turning a liar, right? That Bernard says. So therefore, it's hitting the mark. The original metaphor was like an archer hitting the a mark, but here it's like tuning a lyre, where you have what? You have a boundary. You have to hit a certain level, tightening and loosening, right? Tightening and loosening. And he says three, the phrase translates a single word, horos, which means simply a stone or indicator of a boundary, right? This is defining horos of the middle, the point, the defining point, or defining instance, boundary of the middle. And he said, it's interesting here of the middles, because here it's plural in the Greek of this word meso. It will be meso, it will be the plural word here. So of the middles, which middle we assert is between the excess and the deficiency, since it is in accord with correct reading. So it's interesting here as this paragraph. The middle here is referring to all the middles that we have dealt with. Which middle we assert is between the excess and deficiency, right? So again, the original metaphor that we talked about middle was like hitting the target. Now it's kind of more like tuning a leer, tuning something, tightening and loosening it, tightening and loosening it, right? And trying to make sure we hit it. By speaking in this way, though truthful, not at all clear, but speaking in this way is, though truthful, not at all clear. So he says that in one sense, it is truthful. We're correct. We're being truthful to what is what's happening, but it's not at all clear in that sense. What is meant by the middle? How do we access it? For in all the other concerns too, about which a science exists, a science exists, episteme exists, it is true to say that one ought not to strain or slacken either too much or too little, but in accords with the mean and as correct reason states. So therefore, the science, what it concerns to a science, wants precision. And it is true to say one ought not to strain or to slacken, either too much or too little. In other words, it just should be exact. You shouldn't go too far, or you shouldn't go too little. But in accord, hit exactly what the mean as correct reason requires or states, right? Yet if somebody should possess this alone, he would be no further ahead in his knowledge. For example, he would not know what sort of things ought to be applied to the body if someone should say, so many things as the art of medicine commands, and as he who possesses that art commands, right? So therefore, in other words, even if you possess the mean, right? He says, even if someone should possess this alone, knowing what is true, right? Knowing what is the true mean of this, he would be no further ahead of all his knowledge, for he would not know the sort of things that have to be applied, right, to the body, as the line is so many things as the art of medicine commands, right? Hence, in the case of the characteristics of the soul too, not only this should be stated truly. In other words, the question of, you need to hit the mean, know what the mean is, right? But what correct reason is must also be defined. What is, and what its defining boundary is. So not only this idea we should hit the mean, right? This is not enough. We have to understand, we have to define what orthologos means, correct reason here means, and what is its defining boundary. Okay, so therefore not only the question of we should know what the mean is, but what orthologos itself means, right? The correct reasoning here means. When defining the virtue of soul, we assert that some are virtues of character and others of thinking, right? And five here is um, that is moral virtue, virtues of character, so therefore the virtues of character, right, and others of thinking. Now, as for the ethical virtues, ethicae, virtues of ethica, right, we have gone through them. But as those that remain, let us first speak about the soul, and do so as follows. So we're going to, in other words, we defined this. At first, we talked about the question of soul. We talked about the questions of virtues. The first of character now, thinking we dealt with book 3, 4, and 5 have 3 and 4 dealt with most of the virtues of character, and book 5 dealt with justice, right? The peak and crowning of virtue, I could say. One of the peaks, that's the point. Magnanimity is said to be a peak within the character virtues, but justice seems to be the one that gets the most attention, right? He goes, we're going to speak about the soul. We're going to have to talk about the soul. For what remains, let us first speak about the soul and do as follows. It is stated previously, then, that there are two parts of the soul, one possessing reason, as well as the non-rational part. So two parts of the soul. One is possessing reason, possessing or capable of exercising reason, and the other is a non-rational part, right? But now we must divide the part possessing reason in the same manner. Let it be posited that the parts possessing reason are two. So the two parts of the rational, right? The reasoning, right? One part is that by which we contemplate all those sorts of beings whose principles do not admit otherwise. So there's two parts. One part contemplates beings, all those sorts of beings whose principles, whose characteristics or principles do not admit being otherwise. One part that by which we contemplate all those things that do admit of being otherwise. So there's two parts. One that admits that either it is or it isn't, and that's all it is. It's something is or is not. It doesn't admit variation. The second one, this part of the soul, the second part of the soul that's rational, admit that it is able to know what is. He says we can contemplate those things that do admit of being other what they are. They sometimes they come into being, pass away, right? They're changeable. They're changing. They're not simply are. They're not unchanging. They're changeable. So the things that are non-changeable, the eternal things that simply are, and the things that admit being otherwise. For when it comes to beings that differ in kind from one another, the part of the soul that naturally relates to each is also different in kind. So when it comes to the question of beings, right? If we're going to contemplate all those things that admit being otherwise, right? So when it comes to come to beings that differ in kind from one another, the parts of the soul that naturally relates to each is also different in kind. If in fact it is by dint of a certain similarity and kinship that knowledge is available to the rational part of soul. So therefore, the similarity between the two types of parts of the soul and the similarity of the kind of reason, this is how knowledge, how he says, it is dint by a certain similarity and kinship that knowledge is available to the rational parts of the soul. And let it be said that one of these is scientific and the other is calculative. Now, this is a big thing. Here, epistemonicon and the calculative is logisticon. So there's two types of characteristics. There's something scientific or epistemologicon, epistemonicon, epistememonicon, and a logisticon, right? There's calculative and scientific. For deliberating and calculating are the same thing, and nobody deliberates about things that do not admit of being otherwise. So you don't deliberate about things that are eternal. Things that always are, this is scientific. Episteme, he says. The things that are that don't are that are things that simply that are constant, the things that don't admit variation, the things that are or not, things that don't admit variation. You don't deliberate on those. You don't. They're not calculative in the sense. They're scientific. They're an aspect of epistemonicon. Epistemonicon, right? Calculative. For deliberative and calculative are the same thing, and nobody deliberates about things that do not admit of being otherwise. The calculative is a result. The so-called logisticon, calculative, is a result. Um, uh, is as a result is one part of that which possesses reason. So at first his account seems to suggest it's scientific that he divides the rational part of the soul in two. One in terms of scientific epistemicon, and then the so-called calculative, which is logisticon. Right, these two, and that is this: the calculative is, as a result, is one part of the soul that possesses reason. So it is necessary to grasp what the best characteristic of each of these two parts is. For this is the virtue of each, and virtue is relative to the work belonging to each thing. So he ends this first chapter saying that first of all, the rational part, like the part, the soul is divided into what he says, the rational and the non-rational. And then of the rational, this itself is divided in two, between those that deal with the eternal, things that don't admit change, things that are what they are, right? And those that vary, things that do admit, that come, that are, what he says, um, uh, uh, divide into two manners. He said those who admit change and those who contemplate the things that admit being otherwise, right? They can be other than they are, right? And that the scientific deals with the things that don't admit change, things that they are or not, and the calculative deals with the things that are changeable, things that can vary, right? The calculative and deliberative are the same thing, he asserts, right? And one does not deliberate about things, do not admit things, do not admit of being otherwise. So if you don't deliberate about eternal things, things that are or are not, things that don't vary, you don't deliberate. You deliberate about the changeable, not the unchanging, not the eternal. So therefore it is necessary to grasp what is best, the best characteristic of each of these two parts of the soul. What is best. For this is the virtue of each, he says. That's the first. So therefore these two parts would have a virtue, the argument is, right? And a virtue is relative to the work that belongs to each thing. So let's stop here. If you have any comments or questions, please put them below. If you've liked the video, hit the like button, please, and share it on share it on social media. Share it on around to your friends. Spread it. If you've not subscribed, please consider subscribing. If you know someone who wants to do it, encourage them to subscribe. Know someone who's interested in these kind of things, encourage them to subscribe. If you didn't like it, you can always thumb down it, but say why in the comments so those people can learn and benefit from it. That's why we're doing this. Another thing we can do is you want to follow me on social media. The links are below. If you want to know more about me as an academic and as a scholar and check out my research and things, check out the academic social media links below those. If you want to help me to do what I do, you want to financially help me to do what I do in this sense, you can do so through the links of Patreon on our Subscribe Star that are done below. Another way you can help assist on this is to buy you can buy one of my books. The books listed below. You can buy it at your local bookstore or through an online bookstore like Barnes & Noble or Amazon or something like that. And that's it. Okay, we'll turn next time to Chapter 2, which will continue this question of the intellectual virtues. and we'll look at the problem that he sets here. What is the virtues of each, right? The two parts of this virtue, the changeable and the returnable, and the virtue, the kind of virtue that each has, right? I'm going to stop here. Take care. Bye-bye.